live streaming, it looks like. Waiting for my YouTube to open up. Okay. Popping open the chat in case anybody is here that would like to join the conversation with us. I can see your comments, so feel free. And welcome to Goddess Vibrations, a spiritual sexual empowerment show. I am here with a very sweet friend and colleague and fellow sister on the path, Golden Drake. She's a life midwife. And also I know her to be a phenomenal, I would say, like embodiment and dance teacher. And I know anytime I'm in a drum circle with you, I just don't know what happens. You bring something out in me that nobody else quite does. So I really love that title of life midwife, because you certainly do birth things in me. So I am super excited for this conversation, super excited for this topic, which we are discovering is something that we don't talk about enough. And it can be very hard to navigate. So thank you for being on the show. And how would you like to start?
Well, thanks for having me. It's definitely an honor to be here. And like you said, it's an honor to weave on this topic that doesn't seem to get much love as far as, I've experienced in my life. And so perhaps that's part of our greater intention, is to bring these conversations forth more into our culture, and especially just amongst those that are perhaps taking the walk into menopause, or have people in their lives that are experiencing the arc into menopause, whether it's a partner or it's a family member or whoever it might be, to feel into it. And it seems to be such a realm that's hidden away from us on so many levels. So I love to bring conversation and light to this experience.
I love the word that you used, arc, because it really is like, I think of like rainbow is like a connection point, a bridge, like an arc, and it's such a journey, and it can be such a long journey for some people because they don't even know that they're having maybe hormonal shifts or perimenopausal symptoms. I've also often wondered, like, people keep telling me I'm at that age, but I'm like, I don't feel anything different, but maybe there's something there that I'm just so subtle I'm not aware of, right? And then there's other people like yourself who had a forced menopause because of something, in your case, going through cancer treatment, breast cancer, or they had something else go on with them that the arc was much shorter and much quicker, and that having its own challenges. So are you open to sharing your story? Because I haven't even really heard your full story. I don't know if you're comfortable.
Absolutely. I'm happy to share it. And again, with the intent that by speaking to the experience, that perhaps it could be create resonance or activation or points of connection for people who are going through any similar experience. So, like you were just saying, in the years preceding, there was a few years preceding my very drastic shift into menopause, where I was asking the question, which seems to be sort of the beginning of the arc, is like, is this menopause? Is this what this is? Am I perimenopausal? Am I entering into that phase of my life? And so I was already kind of dancing around with that question and quandary around what's happening with my cycle and my body and my being, my moods, everything. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer at age 42. And that's a whole conversation in and of itself. But as it pertains to shifting into menopause in a very traumatic, dramatic way, I literally went from 1 month to the next directly into menopause because of such severe effects of chemotherapy in my body. So after my first round of chemo, literally my moon cycle just vanished. And I was just kind of waiting around for it to, come back, its monthly cycle. And I remember going to my first, checkup with my oncologist, and I was like, where's my moon cycle? And the way that he handled it was just so startling. And he was just kind of like, oh, well, yeah, this is one of the potential effects of chemo, is that, women can go into menopause and it can be 50%, that's their statistic, of women can eventually get it back, and 50% of women don't. And I was devastated because there was no preparation for that. I went through a whole teaching class where I learned about potential side effects, or not even side effects, effects of chemotherapy, as I prefer to call them, death being the top of the list, heart failure, there's all kinds of effects, secondary stage 4 cancers. So imagine the laundry list, and menopause wasn't on that list. So I wasn't prepared. And as a woman who had put in a lot of time, energy, and effort to actually reclaim that as a sacred monthly occurrence in my life, from what I, experienced more in my maiden phase and passages of my mother phase, I put in so much of my life force energy to really reclaim this powerful cycle in my womanly body. And so to have it just disappear without any forewarning, it felt at the time like it was robbed from me. And, I was also processing almost nearly dying from that first chemo treatment, and just all the other effects that I was experiencing, where I literally, I was in that liminal space with life and death, and was just having so many ill effects in my body temple. And I couldn't even tell if the hot flashes and the erratic mood swings and everything that I was experiencing was chemo, menopause, all of it mixed together, shock, trauma, shock of losing my father right before I was diagnosed to cancer himself.
Wow.
So it was just this whole chaotic array of experiences that were happening simultaneously. And I realized I was also in this massive, trauma portal and grief portal in real time. And there wasn't time actually for any of it, because it was just like this time of life and death, fighting for my life experience, while trying to process it in real time and trying to grieve in real time. And it was messy. And now I am 4 years out from that year of treatment and experience, the allopathic treatment. And, just now I'm really starting to come to terms with, like menopause just being here in my body. And of course, I'm open to what may come. My cycle may come back or it may not. But I'm really working with the crone initiation, the crone mystery, and working with that energy in my life, and really tuning into the fact of, it feels like it is time for me to create my own crone crowning in my life, crone initiation, self-initiation, to honor this phase. And it makes me remember, you might be able to relate to this. I'm not sure if you had this experience, but when you were birthing your children, I'm curious if you had that sort of grief that came with the dying of the maiden aspect, as we are transitioning and arcing into the mother phase, the mother aspect of the cycle of our womanly life, right? I remember distinctly having grief around the maiden phase dying away as I stepped fully into the mother initiation, rite of passage with birth and motherhood, and being charged with responsibility for these new lives. And so I had my own process around that. Did you have an experience like that?
Yeah, thank you for bringing that up, because you kind of forget, because it's so much all at once, right? It's such a big transition. I do say that birth has been the most powerful transformative thing in my life, as far as what it's made me, and I'm a big sister. I'm a motherly energy just right out of my mother's womb, to be honest. But still, it's a whole new level to have to be attentive to another human being 24/7 and responsible for them. And that was not something I was prepared for. And I was anxious and feeling overburdened and stressed and just like feeling like I was going to fuck it up and all of that. And it took me, I would say, about a year before I even felt like a mother. Like I just felt like I was me with a baby, but I didn't really feel fully 100% like a mother. And I had a surprise pregnancy too. So I really only had that 9 months to really adjust to the idea. And there wasn't a lot of like security in my environment at the time. So it was like, damn, it was a lot. It was a lot. And that's a happy thing. That's something that, people are all like, oh, babies, we love babies, and it's fertility and it's abundance and all of this thing. And then I'm wondering now, like, how I look back to like watching my mom go through, she went through an early menopause as well, because she had to have a surgery. And, the doctors, they were just like, well, this might cause you trouble down the line, so let's just take it out. And she had no idea, again, went into shock about like, whoa, what just happened? That they just, I don't think they needed to do all that kind of thing. And she was very distressed. And she was so distressed that I had just so much compassion for her, when maybe in the past I didn't have so much compassion for her mood swings, but now I like had so much compassion for her. And I was like, wow, I don't know how to help, but I can tell what you're going through is biological. That's affecting the emotional and the fear probably, and the shock, like you're saying, of it. And then what does that mean? And I remember her having to grieve, because she loved being, she had 6 pregnancies, she loved being pregnant. She loved that piece, and to grieve that shutting down too was a big thing, for her womb shutting down. And again, not choosing or not gradually being able to go into it, but the kind of like at the hands of men in a way. That's even if you have the female doctors, it's a very linear Western masculine slash and burn, cut it off kind of medicine that we are raised in a culture that we're raised in, right? So it's really fascinating to me. But yeah, and then I did grieve the not having my time and like it's time to just sit quiet and reflect and not have to feed somebody or whatever else. Now I got it down after 14 years. I'm just like, I think I got it down mostly. I'm probably going into a whole new wave now as my daughter moves through, puberty, and my son and their cycles. It's never ending. But I do resonate. I do resonate in the identity of mother not really taking a while to set in.
Yeah. And I know I was really aware of this feeling like my maiden self is dying.
Mm.
And it was a very startling feeling. And although my inner knowing tells me that at any point in the arc of our life, we have maiden, mother, crone, unseen realms alive within us at all times, right? But when we're in that physical, actual embodiment of that part of the arc, that's where we're at. That's how we identify ourselves. That's what is real. And then when that phase or that face of the goddess or of our embodiment dies,
Mm-hmm.
there is a grief in that. And then we're reborn in the next phase. And so maiden to mother, we're arcing into that midpoint, midday sun in the sky, full abundance, full fertility, full power, full clarity, right? The empowered mother is discerning, fierce, protectress, abundant, clear, wise. She's kind of straddling maiden and crone. And then when we're shifting into from mother to crone and our mother self is dying as arc into menopause, it's very confronting on so many levels because we're arcing towards the unseen realms. This is the final face of the goddess. If we have the privilege to live a long life in this body, as we shift from mother to crone, well, what's next after crone? We all know crone is the guardian of the gates of the unseen realm. So as the mother identity dies away and as the crone is born, the crone is this face or phase of the goddess that says, I speak for death, right? I am arcing us towards the surrender of this body temple. It's very confronting. It's doubly confronting when we are born and raised into a culture that seems to be hyper focused and obsessed with the maiden phase or forever 21, right? It's just like such a perfect example of this fixation with the fountain of youth, that we all must have this maiden face and body embodiment because this society trashes women once we're no longer viable to be the bearers of seeds.
Yeah, the bearers of something for somebody else. Yeah. Productive.
Yeah. And it's very confronting to see a woman when in the society we all understand, whether it's consciously or subconsciously or unconsciously, we're all aware that women, our beauty is our currency in a certain sense. And, in a society that's hyper fixated on youth as beauty, right? It's just, that's what beauty is. It's youth. It could never be the crone. It could never be wrinkled and sagging and silver hair. I mean, speaking in terms of the construct.
I agree. And the thing that just is just such a stark example is when you look at like the models, the female models on a magazine, or like when people are doing their selfies or whatever, what's the classic look? It's her kind of duck lips or her pout, right? Like the youthful pout and the Botoxed forehead. Smooth, got to be smooth. But with the man, no matter what age he is, he could be 70, he could be 22. It's the wrinkled, like forehead, inquisitive kind of look. Like, and I'm like, whoa, I wish, what would happen if we could have that wrinkled, inquisitive look? That just tells you right there. Like we, as women, would be programmed like, don't do that. They're going to set in, the wrinkles. And yeah, so it's really interesting when we look at these things. Why aren't wrinkled women thought of? Or even when I look at like my grandmothers, I remember my Finnish grandmother, she never saw the sun, and she was just very, she ate healthy, took supplements, she had really good, skin. And even in her 80s, she didn't have so many wrinkles. And that was the thing. It was just like, wow, look at how beautiful her skin is, right? But it was also like judged on how many wrinkles were there as opposed to other women. Yeah.
Standard of beauty. Yeah. The way that we define it is so oriented around youthfulness, which youthfulness is beautiful. And, it's like the multiplicity of the many faces of the goddess. So is the mother phase. So is the crone phase when we have eyes to see it. And that was one of the unexpected gifts that Cancer gave me was, when I would look in the mirror and I was confronted with not recognizing myself at all due to the effects of that that I was undergoing. Not only mentally did I have this diagnosis, just like permeating my existence, I had to constantly, there was a level of disassociation. Like I'd be like, wait, oh yeah, that thing is happening to me. It's happening to me. And then the effects of the treatments, being bald, hairless, bloated, going through the surgery, having scars all over my chest and burns, and just, I had to work through the horror of what I saw in the mirror and not recognizing the person that I saw or felt, because suddenly it was like a case of the body snatchers where I felt like I was in 100-year-old body suddenly, like unrecognizable on so many levels. And I really had this mental battle with being horrified by what I saw and felt, and just felt so ugly, just like horrifically ugly, just to be totally honest. And by the grace of God, there was a shift in my awareness where I began to be able to see myself through a different lens. It was like someone just kind of came and adjusted my perception of myself. And I started to have these words, unconditional beauty, started to just roll through my awareness. And I started to shift my relationship with who I saw in the mirror. And so it was like simultaneously being horrified while bridging into a broader perspective of like, oh my God, I'm alive. And it was like this astonishing, mind-blowing miracle to say, even amidst all of these things that I'm inflicting on this body temple to survive, like the irony of it, and that's we could talk about this. But when I began to tune into, oh my God, even while I'm doing these things to my body temple is so devoted to my spirit that it's willing to self-heal. It's like all these things were happening. My body's like, still going to heal, still going to be alive, still going to go, we're still going to go. And it was like, it blasted my consciousness of like, I started to have this coming to terms with a lifetime of negative self-talk, false belief systems, programming around conditional beauty, and how I was sort of, born into a world and really received the imprints around beauty being conditional, and you had to do certain things in order to try to fit into conventional beauty standards, which I could never, no matter how hard I forced, I just couldn't get to that, which turned out to be a blessing for me in this whole other way of like, yeah, beauty is so much more than what we are force-fed in this really tiny, rigid construct of unobtainable beauty, especially because we were born into the generation of at any cost.
Yeah.
Whatever you need to do to achieve that.
Yeah. Starve yourself, work out 5 hours a day, do cocaine. I mean, I never did that, but smoke cigarettes, do whatever you need to do. Don't you dare eat. Like, you don't deserve to eat. Like, who do you think you are? Look at that extra body fat on your arms or legs.
In order to achieve, even though it's warped, a sense of self-worth and lovability.
Yeah. To be accepted.
It's demented. And I just realized I was really confronted with how much I had been participating in that, and, knew it to a certain extent, but really started dropping into this amazing compassion of, oh my God, body, you've endured so much. And you are my devoted companion. And just the fact that you exist makes you beautiful. And then a step deeper than that was I realized, body or no body, you are beautiful because you exist. Even if you don't have a body, because I was really confronting death. It was like, dude, I could die. I don't know if I'll make it through the day. There were days where I wasn't sure if I was going to make it through the day. And so I had this awakening of, even if I don't have a body, I'm still beautiful. Even if my body is, battered, it can't walk, it can't function properly, I'm still beautiful because I exist. And then that helped me to start being more able to see the beauty in others, right? It was like deleting the old programs that had really limited my ability to truly see people and see beauty beyond constructs and judgments and just false belief systems and imprints. So yeah, it's a really roundabout way to respond to that. But it helped me to start to see beauty in the crone, in women, in crone's bodies that I would see before. They were more invisible to me. And, in my younger years, when someone would say that I looked like my mother, or if I saw a photo and I thought I looked like my grandma, there was some messed up thing in my head that thought, oh my God, that means that I'm not this like beautiful like thing. I look like them and they don't look like the construct. So that means that I'm not beautiful. Mm-hmm. Whereas now I'm starting to see the features of my mother and my grandmother's in me. And the blessing that I received is that now I see that as beauty. Even if the world tells me that the wrinkles on my face, double chin, belly, whatever the thing is that, I've struggled with before, now it's like, it means so much more than trying to plug myself into some totally unrealistic expression of beauty, to be like, dude, what's really beautiful? What's the true definition of beauty? And who am I performing beauty for anyways? Mm-hmm. And that's the crone. That's the empowered crone that speaks, that says, fuck your beauty standards. They don't mean anything to me.
Well, like you said, nobody really fits in them, because the beauty standards are the airbrushed, photoshopped models who they themselves don't even meet the standard, right? Fully. It's an illusion.
And they look very unhappy.
Mm-hmm.
They cannot be happy with having to live 24/7 obsessed by being this very unrealistic embodiment, right? Have to do so much to try to port yourself into this thing.
I had a lot of pressure to look a certain way, especially around weight, and being much thicker build than most of the women in my family on my mom's side. And so for me, like all my siblings, they wore the Lee jeans, slim fit, and I had the Lee regulars always. It's just little things like that. And, thank goodness for J-Lo and those folks that came up as we were like in our early 20s, because then it's like, okay, now it's finally okay to have, a little bit of thickness. And, but it was always a thing. And I reflect back on this often, because I should have had an eating disorder based on the milieu, the culture, as well as my family culture. I should have had an eating disorder. And not to say that I didn't have unhealthy eating and emotional eating and stress eating and restrictions and calorie counting and all of that. It was definitely in that spectrum, but I was never like hospitalized or anything like that. And I think it's because I was an athlete and I played 3 sports. And so if you're an athlete, you start to appreciate, and you were a dancer, and I know there's different pressures that go with that too, but it's like you start to appreciate how your body can like move and the things that it can do and the strength of it and the fun of the game And just the whole conditioning of it, and um, the just the way that you have to feed it in order for it to perform for you, or for it to like be there for you. And I think I learned, that was my first little bits of kind of like self-care, was just like getting myself prepared for a game to, to play well. And yet, and again, with me, like especially basketball was a very competitive sport in my very small town. It was like there was nothing else to do, so you were the entertainment. And it was a lot of pressure, and I still have stress dreams about it sometimes, so it wasn't like it was a total happy-go-lucky healthy thing either, which I imagine dancing might have been for you, because of the pressures put on dancers and the weight restrictions and those sorts of things too. But yeah, I resonate so much, and I feel like sometimes women look at me and they say things like, "Oh, you're beautiful. You haven't had to deal with." And I'm like, "Oh my gosh, no, all women have had to deal with this. This is a universal thing." And it's and the sad part is, because our topic is about pleasure, now that I'm doing my research, my PhD dissertation on spiritual sexual awakening, female sexuality, these sorts of things, and I dive into the research, which by the way is very little, like there's not enough, which is why I chose to take this topic on, even though it's not popular, um, is that body confidence and the way you feel about your body has so much to do with your orgasmic ability and your feelings of pleasure. And also, that's with some of the initial findings in the research, but also it's being witnessed and held and seen. And I was just sharing today how, in a conversation, when the womb gathering that you hosted in the Body Blessing, in that very room you're sitting in right now, and creating that womb, that safe space, right, that is not only contained in a living room, but also with the energy of the women that are holding the space, and opening the container like you do so well, and closing the container, all of that. And then we did the yoni gazing on our own afterwards when we went home, and I was surprised at the like puffiness, like the engorgement hours later. And there was nothing sexual that happened in that womb space, but it was being so deeply held and so deeply seen that my body responded in a way that I wasn't even aware of until we did the yoni gazing. And I was like, wow, that's some powerful freaking work right there. That not only are you doing and Kirti's doing, but to understand that this is a thing. And then there's research being done to kind of validate it, because crazy woman comes up with these ideas, and it's not, we have to have the research to like prove it, right? And yeah, and I'm like, you start to understand some of these portals to pleasure that have nothing to do with what you look like.
Absolutely. And the word that comes up when I think about that circle is intimacy.
Mm-hmm.
True intimacy of being a contributor to creating a sacred vortex,
Mm-hmm.
and building that trust within the group where each participant can be in their authentic expression, right? And having the body be honored as the temple that it is, inviting it forth to speak its truth, having the drums, having the rhythms, having the sounds, having the sacred, safe container of the womb space around us, having the lights dim, right? It's like it's signaling to the body temple, it's okay to be, it's okay to ripen, it's okay to express. And I just
Right.
love tuned into that in your own body, and then you got to see it and witness it.
Yeah, 100%. And you know and the word, I love the word ripen, because it's ripen, it's juicy. I work with a lot of menopausal women that come through the wellness center that I speak at and do workshops at. I do a lot of hypnosis, um, and I'm often doing hypnosis to reconnect them with their spirit self, their soul self, their powerful self, and their goddess self, and just taking them through a progression, a future rehearsal of being this radiant, magnetic being. And a lot of times they forget in their crone years that they are still that energy, right? And it's so, those sessions for me are so powerful, like just to honored to be, I like say, guiding someone back to themselves, right? And leading them back to themselves and leading them back to juiciness, whether it is actual vaginal lubrication, or it's like remembering that they're exquisite and they deserve self-care and they deserve the best. Remembering for them that even if some of them, their husbands aren't really functioning sexually for various reasons, and they're feeling the effects of that, of not being desired, right? And they can still they can still feel desired, even if sex isn't working the same that it used to in the 20s or 30s or 40s. And so I'm just curious about what you've recognized about tapping into pleasure in this body that, felt 100 years old, and then now it's kind of settling into, well, don't know if my moon cycle is going to come back, but here I am. And it's like you're still kind of, seems like you're going moment to moment. But what are your pleasure portals that you suggest for women who
Well,
like they're drying up or whatever else?
yeah, I
It's
mean,
no longer ripe or juicy.
it's interesting because I was thinking about the clients you were referring to in terms of if their partners are having any kind of their own struggle with arousal, and how it's easy to personalize that as well, right? It could be like, well, what's wrong with me that I'm not arousing you anymore? Is it me, right? And who knows what the whole convergence of
So
certain,
different factors. Yeah.
but it's compounded by the fact that we live in this world that is continuously telling us, don't show your signs of aging. You become just an unimportant part of society anymore. You start to become invisible. The world's not seeing you as arousing, this performative beauty to titillate and arouse people. It's like the aging process is so confronting on so many levels, so many levels. And in the society that doesn't seek to honor women in the crone phase as wise women, that she who retains her sacred blood in her cauldron, she's doing other kinds of magic. And, it's like when we're in the moon phase, we're really connected with the waxing and the waning of the moon. And when we're in the crone phase, it's like we're feeling the expansions and contractions of the freaking universe.
It's not just the moon, motherfuckers.
How it feels. So, yeah, bringing pleasure into the conversation. For me personally, I have an interesting set of circumstances because I'm young. I would never have imagined that I'd be in my crone phase at 42. I just never in my wildest dreams would have thought that. So here I am, 46. And so not only am I in the crone phase much earlier than I imagined I would be, but I'm also in a body that's in chronic high degree pain constantly. And I'm single.
Mhm.
And my body is now permanently disfigured. I don't know what the right word would be. I don't have my breasts anymore, you
Mhm.
know? So it has these effects on my mental of am would I be arousing to others? I don't know. I mean, and I'm not in the dating world. I'm in this different space where I am charged with being my own source of arousal or pleasure. I am the giver and the recipient simultaneously. And I'm not getting the external validations or getting that kind of exchange if we're talking about like physical intimacy with others.
Mhm.
So I source my sensuality in different ways that honor where I'm at in a very authentic way. And that might mean deep rest,
Mhm.
right? Sensuality, the sensuality of I wake myself up early so that I can make my tea and lay in my bed and feel the warmth of the blankets. I literally hold myself every morning. I embrace myself. I feel what it feels like to give the embrace. I feel what it feels like to receive it and be self-sourced in that way.
Mhm.
Not saying that it's like that's all that I want. I would love to have the exchange with a beloved as well.
And we all want that, right? Like we all, it's a very natural, the most probably biggest human need and desire.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It is. And so I go through my own grief waves of I don't have it and I feel the lack and the loss of that. And I, ebb and flow and the tides move. And then I'm like, and I am able to hold myself right now. I'm able to love myself through that. I'm able to, I have some yummy cannabis oils that I'll self massage. These are the sensual pleasures. Or if it's like lighting a candle in my bedroom and having candlelight or listening to the rain fall, it's like taking a walk by the ocean, feeling the breeze, making eye contact with people. These are all these different forms and expressions of sensuality and pleasure. And, also just speaking to living in a body that has chronic high degree pain all the time. And being a dancer and being a very embodied person. And prior to going through cancer treatments, I was very sexually embodied, very sexually expressed. That was like one of my strongest love languages. That was just my embodied expression of my sensuality was just so important, like language to me, right? It was just,
You bring it out in me. That makes sense now. I'm like, okay, this is what this is what's happening because you give me permission to be the same because I have that same urge and desire and that need to express that way. So it totally makes sense what you're telling me now.
that. It's one of our love languages, right?
Mhm.
And so it really does a number on my mental to be like, well, I mean, I've been single for a while too. So I just am so curious when I am with a lover, a beloved, what is it going to be like to be in a body that's like high degree of pain that doesn't move the way that it did? And so I'm just having my own radical experience with myself. And
Mhm.
it feels right for the moment on so many levels. And I get to decide the level of subtlety or intensity, or just it's there's something very radical and empowering and freeing about that. It's totally non-performative.
Right.
And it's not even about having to do like make certain kind of, when you're in a relationship and you're in give and take dance and exchange. And when it's just you do exactly what you need in any moment. And so there's a beauty in that. And there's also just a grief in that. It's just there, it's so
Yeah.
many things at once.
I feel you. And I know so many women who mirror that, not even having the physical pain or having gone through cancer and having those hormonal shifts, but just like the deep loneliness, or like not having a partner that can meet them in their spiritual needs, their sexual needs, their emotional needs, or not having a partner yet, let's say, that can meet them in that way. And it's just like, man, I'm wired for connection. I'm wired to speak this, to speak this sexuality through my body, but why am I laying here in my bed by myself for, months, years, these sorts of things? And it also speaks to your standards, it speaks to your standards and what you knowing your worth. And I had so much, like so many thoughts flying around in my head while I was listening to you, and just like little bing, bing, bing. The ability that a woman has to source her own pleasure is a life skill. Like any woman needs that. Even if she gets married at 16 and stays married her whole entire life, she's going to need to source her own pleasure, right? Depending, and not put that on a partner, because a partner is not always going to be able to meet that. And I think we get into trouble because if we watch movies and read the books and all these things, that's what we're told, is that it's him, like he's bringing it out of us, or it's her, she's bringing it out of us, but it's really us. And I think what I'm learning as I get older, as I go deeper into the sexuality work with my clients. I've been a therapist for 20 years, but like to really focus in on sensuality and sexuality, it's only been since maybe like 2015 that's been an emphasis area. And as I go deeper and I'm working with both men and women of all different ages and all different cultures and all different issues, I'm realizing that men often believe that they also believe it's them that's bringing that out in women. Like they believe that if they made a woman come or squirt or do whatever, that was because of what he brought. But what often they don't understand, and of course men are sexy and they do, like, obviously arouse us, and all of, if you're heterosexual, and all of this, but she's already prepared herself for that moment of contact. Like she's already had fantasies about you in her head, or the longing or the desire, or laying in the bed with the tea and the blankets up. So by the time you show up with the touch or the erection or whatever it is, like she's been waiting, she's been ready to just burst, and then and they're like, oh, I'm a really good lover. And it's like, yes, you can be a very good lover, but you have to understand the ripening, to use your word, that women require to have that spiritual transformative sexual experience that women so crave. Because what I'm realizing is that when women orgasm, their brain lights up in the same area that it'll light up as if they're having a spiritual experience, and that doesn't happen in men's brains. And so it's a kind of a different experience. It's a very holistic, non-body, the body is part of it, but we can also, another thing that men don't have, we have a bigger, deeper connection with imagery and visualization to our bodies. And so we can imagine things, we can imagine being touched. Like you could imagine your nipples being stroked or whatever else, and you could, theoretically bring yourself to orgasm that way, just by imagining, where that would be very difficult for a man to do that. Not that he can't. And I'm realizing even when men self-pleasure, there's a lot of shame around the self-pleasuring. And I think part of it is because I can't believe I'm just finally like putting this together, like at this stage of my life. But I think a lot of it has to do with the fact that he's almost requiring porn to even do that. Whereas women, some will watch porn, but most that I talk to don't need it. They have, their fantasies are superior to anything that they're going to watch on a screen of that's, you know, inauthentic or whatever else. And so it's not that the self-pleasuring is the shameful piece or the harmful piece for men, but it's the, what kind of porn are they watching? You know what I mean? Is it degrading? Is there mixed feelings about the things that they're kind of putting into their consciousness? And so, yeah, I just find it very important for women to understand that no matter if they have a partner or not, they have to be always working on that pleasure. And then you're saying, like, you have pain, chronic pain. So like you engaging, it's like a necessity for you to engage in these sensual things to build those endorphins, to fill up your opiate receptors, to turn off the pain. You know what I mean? But we can all do that to increase joy in our life. And this is why we need to be having more sensual experiences. And as crazy as the world is right now and disconnected, right? It's like, how do we reconnect to ourselves and reconnect with another? And one of the things that triggers me sometimes is, you know, oh, you have to love yourself first, or you have to meet your own needs before you can be in a partnership, or before you're ready for a partnership. Yeah, you want to be a healthy person to be in a healthy partnership, but we're supposed to be connected. Like, you don't go into solitary confinement and isolation until you figure your shit out. You know what I mean? Like, that's not how it works. Like, it's like, who came up with that, you know, that idea it's like we go too far with these philosophies sometimes. And so I just feel like it's really natural to desire the touch of another person, but also to want to have it our way, you know?
Yeah. Okay, now I'm having you lit up so many things.
Different areas, and go. Passing the baton.
So just in response to that, yes, we humans thrive in community and connection, right? We're pack animals, we're mammals. And we are living in a very unnatural society that is asking most of us to go, go, go 24/7, 365. It doesn't matter what season it is. It doesn't matter what's going on in the world. It's like just the typical storyline is you go and you do your job, and then you go to the market and you pay your bills and you parent and you do all the things. And if we were living in more right relationship with the earth and her rhythms, we would be living seasonally. We would be allowing for the expansion, the contraction. We would be allowing for the darkening days, the brightening days. We would be allowing for working with the way the earth grows food and then goes into dormancy. And there is a time for us to go and be away and have that sacred solace alone, and to come back refreshed and regenerated and to contribute, right? And women would do that when they were on their moon cycle. They would go away into their power, into their magic, not forever, but just we have something going on. It's very sacred. It's very holy. And we know how to care for each other. And then we come back and we're regenerated and we have energy. We're overflowing with energy to share.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so I just think, like, we're in such a dysfunctional society, and we're trying to like make it work in just a very broken system that is not about our health and thriving whatsoever. Mm-hmm. And expects us to just be machines and bots. And eventually, if we try to abide by that, and it will come to a crashing halt. And I just think of my own life. My body just came to the point where it was like, I can't sustain this anymore. I'm going to now crash and burn for a while. And then I just also, when you were talking about, when you were about to say the porn thing, I was thinking it too. I was like that. So when men don't have at this point that imagination, right? So they're turning to the visual stimuli and they're turning to the go-to porn. I'm curious what's been deactivated in men where they don't have the imaginal, or is that truly our biological design and the differentiation between men and women? And when you were talking, I thought we as women, we are so connected to the imaginal realms. We're so connected to the unseen realms. And when we're orgasming, it is a spiritual, cosmic experience if we want to allow ourselves to take it into those realms. Mm-hmm. And I thought, of course it is. We are these conduits of calling in spirit into our wombs.
Yeah, right.
Our bodies. Like, right. Of course, when we orgasm, we are blasted into the oneness, because it's like
you're literally, yeah, you're like, come, there's a womb here. Like, here's my call, my lighthouse. I never put that together either. So thank you for that. Absolutely. Like, of course.
I wonder if a man, like a fully actualized, activated man, has as much access to the imaginal realms, like, or is there's something different about their design where they're more like earthen, grounded, seed bearing, and we're more like the, Mm-hmm. I'm curious.
Well, if you're believing that the soul lives before it comes into a body and after it comes into a body and has reincarnations, then it's kind of like what you were saying about we always have access to the maiden, mother, and crone. It's like, but you're really attached to this body phase. I feel like that's how we are in this incarnation, right? Like we might have lived in a different culture, had a different skin color in a past life, a different gender, a different sex, whatever else. But in this one, we're especially present to this current experience, even though we might kind of be like, oh yeah, I kind of remember that. I kind of feel what that is. And so to that level, they must be able to tap in because they've had to before in a different body. And, it's like, how open are their upper chakras, as opposed to the lower chakras too. But I imagine, and I don't know the answer to this, I just know that there are brain differences. I don't know why there are brain differences. And so I think it's an important question to contemplate and be curious about and continue to hypothesize or research or whatever else. But there could be hormonal things that mediate that. It could be societal roles and pressures. And as we know, our DNA is imprinted, right? So we inherit this. It's like from several past generations. And it's like, oh, and I realized that even being married, I was like, I want a non-traditional marriage. I want a very equality, no gender roles marriage. That's what I wanted. And I realized that even though I had the ability to flip back and forth pretty fluently into different gender roles, it does use up a little bit more of my energy. I get a little more exhausted when I'm taking on the more masculine provider type roles, right? And my ex-husband was not very good at, he wasn't as fluent, so when necessity meant I was the provider and he now had to pick up the stuff around the house, that stuff, it was really a crisis for the whole family because he was not fluent or able or desiring or couldn't sustain that. So I think there's probably like individual differences too in those, those, or individual variations, I should say,
yeah,
in that ability. But
a couple other things that I thought as well while you were talking was, were they allowed to feel also, right? As a youngin',
mm-hmm.
to be circumcised.
Damn, that's a big one, huh? That's a early trauma. Mm-hmm.
Like how embodied, how safe do they feel in their
Own body?
much can they feel,
Damn. Yeah, because if you think about it, with any kind of trauma, you're numbing out. You're creating numbness as a defense mechanism. And if you're circumcised, boom, like right away, day one, numb out. And there's your plan. Just numb out anytime something bad happens. Yeah, interesting point. And then having to reclaim that. That's, I guess, men's journey is having to reclaim that, just like we're having to reclaim our menstrual cycles and embracing them instead of thinking it's a curse or a pain or whatever else. Very good points. Wow. Oh, where to go from there? This is, yeah, I love being with other deep thinkers, because it just, it takes me to a whole different depth and level of discovery, which I might not have thought about before. So really appreciating your contributions and just the awarenesses and even the questions.
Thank you. I'm loving this convo.
Yeah. So I felt like there was one other point that I wanted to speak to. Let's see if it comes back. I'm usually not at a loss for words. This is very interesting, but the rain, all the stuff that's going on, makes our brains a little foggy and cloudy sometimes too. I think it had to do with, got a little bit sidetracked on the male female thing, but I feel like where we started to go off was a little bit when you were talking about the spiritual experience of the female orgasm. And I think you were going to say something about porn, or maybe you completed your thought about how they go externally instead of being able to go internal and creating their own imagery in order to arouse. But maybe that was just it.
Yeah, I think that I have a curiosity around the way that society can affect our ability to utilize, access, activate different parts of our consciousness, our awareness, our brains. And so, yeah, I guess that was sort of my question, was like a quick quandary was, what would it be like without porn for men? Like the visual fixation. And I guess before porn, it's just gazing upon a beautiful being, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And there's a difference. I've been talking about this too. And some of this comes from a energy tune group I was in with Sasha Cobra, where she talks, obviously she's all into the energetics, right? And she mentioned that when a man is admiring a woman's beauty, it's like you're walking by, you're admiring a flower, and you're like, wow, like, let me just take this in. She feels that and she opens to that. She's like, yes, we want to be witnessed, we want to be seen, we want to be appreciated.
Yes.
The minute they go wrong is when they turn that into their own fantasy. And so perhaps it's that linear masculine brain. It's like, okay, there's this, now what do we do with it? And then they go into like, okay, now I could see like bending her over or doing this. And Sasha's like, the minute you involve her in your fantasy, like enjoying her beauty and even having sexual feelings about her beauty, is still purity, because it's a natural human phenomena. But then the minute you take her without her awareness, knowledge, or consent and put her into your fantasy, you've now made it perverse. And that's when we feel it as women. And now we're like, ew, like, what is he looking at? Because that's where the energy has gone. And I don't think men really realize how much we feel the difference.
Good point.
And they get really fixated on, but he did that, he walked over and said this or did that. But it's like, but what, with which energy did you approach her? With what energy did you look at her? It's not the fact that you looked at the woman and appreciated her beauty. It's how did you appreciate and what was going on in your mind that was creating your energetic vibration that she's picking up on, because she's such a feeling intuitive being, right?
Right.
And so I feel like the work for women a lot is to, of course, and then obvious with the porn thing is the, if you go to the extreme of unrealistic body standards, right? And then porn is like the extreme of unrealistic body standards, and that's what men are using to arouse themselves. That becomes a problem, an intimacy problem in relationships with a whole other thing, you know. But
Yeah.
the work for women seems to be, again, living, how can we live a more sensual life? Like, how can we create more endorphins and pleasure in our body, because we are so responsive to imagery? And imagery isn't just visual. Imagery is your soft blankets. It's our touch. It's our taste. It's all of our senses. That's all imagery. So whether we're actually feeling it or we're imagining ourselves smelling or touching or whatever else, it's all, the body is responsive to that. And we are our own endorphin factory, right? And creating more joy pulsing through our body. And then the clouds look fluffier and the sky looks brighter and all of that. And so we have that control over our physiology and our lives in that way. Of course, it takes time, just like going to the gym does and cooking a meal and all of that stuff. But that's why we infuse it into everything we do as much as possible. Now, obviously, men could do that as well and benefit, because I think that both men and women are so disconnected from the feminine right now. We're starving. And it's like there's a, I compare it to like a food shortage. And it's like I gotta eat. There's only this morsel. And then it's like, the women, it's like, but it's mine because I'm in a female body. I have to eat first. Like, let me have it first. And then he's like, but wait, I need it too. So can you be the masculine for me so I can explore my feminine? And it's just like, that's what it feels like. And nobody's at fault.
Yes.
Nobody's at fault. And now we're getting like confused, and the women are like, but I don't want to be the masculine. I'm just trying to finally opening up to my feminine, and now I got to be the masculine for you. And I've noticed it not only in movement medicine, but in my S Factor dance classes, all these places that have been traditionally women's circles, and that I thought would just be women. There's like a few men trickling in now. And I'm like, okay, well, I'm okay with it, but it's interesting. Like, it's interesting that they're needing it so bad that they're now coming into women's circles to get in touch with their femininity, and in women's circles that are really focusing, like really going deep into the sensual expression and sexual expression and these things. So it's very interesting to me. And it does allow me to have compassion for all of us, all of us on the planet right now, that is shifting, because this femininity, this feminine power is rising, but it's confusing. It's confusing. And there's still a shortage. There's still a shortage of that feminine way of doing things, or that feminine energy. And then going back to your question about, and your inquiry about the imaginal realms and the imagination, and what would it be like without porn. Gina Ogden, who is she was a licensed marriage, she passed away unfortunately, but she was a licensed marriage and family therapist and a PhD researcher, and she was also a lesbian, studied sexuality, and she self-funded the largest study on integrative, like the integration between sexuality and spirituality. That was her jam. And she wanted to study the experiences of a wide range of people. And so she interviewed heterosexual, LGBT, sex workers, transgender, like I already said, LGBT, long-term. Most of her participants had been in long-term partnerships, 25 years or longer. And she wanted to study their sex lives. And what she realized is that, and she also wanted to study like experiences of extraordinary sex, not just ordinary, regular, traditional penis vagina sex or whatever. And so what she found out is that the experiences of extraordinary sex were the energetic connection. It was the sensual connection that sometimes, because of various factors, the parts aren't working the same, or the parts aren't there, or they don't feel the same, they don't respond the same as they used to. But the sexual experiences between these couples got more and more intense, even without those body functions that we think of as like normal, right?
Yeah.
And so even if you have a body that functions the way that it always did, understanding that it's happening in here. Sex is happening in your mind and in your heart. And it's that connection and that, Kirti and Shofar, sensual emotional exchange. It's like, what energy are you creating? And how can you know each other so well that you're creating enhanced pleasure for each other, even if it doesn't fit porn, even if it doesn't fit the norm, even if it doesn't fit the way other people are doing it or whatever else. And I found that really fascinating. And then there's other research that has looked more at the desire cycle of women and men, and knowing that women are often labeled as dysfunctional because their desire cycle works differently. There has to be a stimulus for arousal. In a new relationship, the first year, her partner can be enough of a stimulus. But after that, cats get bored. Pussies are bored, right? Like they need variety and stimulation and all of these things. And so she has to be willing to be aroused. But it takes time. It takes maybe up to 20 minutes, where it's going to take him maybe on average about 4 to 5 to reach full arousal, or to reach full arousal enough to bring themselves to orgasm, that kind of thing. And so what happens, I think, often with men is they're like, well, she was so responsive before and now she's not. So what am I doing wrong, or what's not happening? And it's a natural phase, right? And he again is thinking that he did that to her and he was 100% responsible for bringing that to her, but she brought that to her. And so when they understand women's desire cycles and understand there needs to be a stimulus, and it varies wildly between women. So once you've figured out one woman, you're gonna have to start all over again and figure out the next one. There's no shortcut. Like we're very different in what our turn-ons are and our desires. And then you understand that and you slow it down and you make it more sensual. And you focus more on her emotional connection, witnessing her, gazing at her, having her feel seen and heard. These things, like, how can you inspire her body confidence? It's her job to have that confidence in her body, but how can you enhance that? How can you compliment her on her body and let her feel safe in her body? Obviously be physically safe, emotionally safe, sexually safe, all those aspects in place. She's going to open up. And so when they taught men how to do these things, provide these things for women in this other sex treatment clinic, the men actually enjoyed better sex lives as well. So it's not like they're having to put all this extra effort to make love to a woman in the way that she wants to be made love to. It's more so trying a different way, which is a metaphor for our culture, right? Trying a different way, and then both benefiting from this alternative way that we never tried before or considered, because maybe it took a little longer, or maybe it looked different than the norm, or whatever else.
Oh, it's so wild, the metaphor, the way it just exactly correlates to the way the world is functioning right now.
Yeah.
Like we're in this fast food porn world. And yeah, just that shift out of, it's like a perceived lack of the divine feminine, because we live on earth.
Yeah.
I mean, that is the divine feminine. And
look what we're doing to her too. Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Just total exploiting and total disregard and just one-way relationships, right?
Yep. One way, exploitative, pollution, just making a mess, leaving it there. That sort of thing. And how do so we're each raised to treat women that way, right? And if you're in a woman's body, then you're like, oh, that's normal to be treated like that, to be discarded. Talking about the age and beauty thing, traded in or whatever else. And if you're a man, it's normal. You just take what you want and then you just toss it aside, kind of
Yeah.
thing. That's even, it's glorified. There's so many songs about it. And it's not even just hip hop, because if you go back and listen to those classic rock songs, they're like just as gnarly as any hip hop song. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was glorified. So it's very interesting. And the pleasure revolution starts with exactly what you're doing. Making your hot tea. Going
Yeah.
back to that, I do the same thing too. I'll wake up and then I like luxuriate in like snuggling in the covers, because I don't get to enjoy it when I'm asleep, because I'm like unconscious. So I gotta lay in bed and like to luxuriate. And my bed is like, whew, that's my happy place for sure. But
Yeah.
yeah, all the different ways that we can create pleasure and explore pleasure. And when we look at it that way, it's kind of like I'm reminded of what you said, that was so beautiful, how you had that, just that all of a sudden that click in of like, I'm alive. And even though all of this is happening to me, I'm still self-healing. And I'm like, these words are coming through and these experiences to like regenerate. And that's exactly what is possible when we stop looking at like the loss of our sexual functioning and being like, no, this is a sideway turn into something even hotter.
Totally.
Yeah.
And even more true and deep and real and authentic.
Absolutely.
And I want to just add, because I really want to bring Mother Earth even further into the conversation, and the divine feminine, in that was such a massive part of that year of treatments for me. Was there was just this magnet and this inner directive within me that was like pulling me to the ocean. And on the days where I felt well enough to get up, I would just I just knew I needed to be there.
Mm-hmm.
And being a single person on the healing journey, and and then freaking through the whole COVID thing, and just needing to source intimacy and connection and touch. And when we don't have it with others,
Mm-hmm.
we can turn to nature as another entity and embodiment for connection. And so
Yes.
it's something that I became aware of, like, oh my gosh, I'm eye gazing with Mother Nature.
Mm.
Ocean, where she's gazing at me, I'm gazing at her, we're talking to each other, we're touching each other, and I guess I want to say that for people who might be single, or whatever their situation is, where they're not in a situation where they can source with another person, sensuality and softening into the feminine and pleasure and being receptive and being engaged in that way. We can totally do that with nature. She's just like a willing participant, always
Mm-hmm.
waiting for us.
And she has lots of sensual pleasures that she's abundantly offering, right? Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah, always. I know. I love it. And that makes sense, because I do use that Mother Nature metaphor a lot in my hypnosis sessions too. So
Really?
yeah, I do. A lot of times at the beach, or like feel her, caressing your cheek with the breeze and flipping your hair playfully, and just stuff like that. It's just, again, connecting people to something bigger than just putting their desires on a human person.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah, because
Yeah.
it's a common thing, that loneliness, and sometimes having somebody that you are in partnership with that isn't available to you in the ways that you want them to be available can be even lonelier, right? Because it's like, wow, I'm stuck, or like, how do I get out of this?
Mm-hmm.
So I've been there before too. Yeah, but I resonate with so much of what you're saying, and just such a beautiful story and beautiful awarenesses that came out of this conversation. And thank you so much for joining me in this space and this level of vulnerability as well, and authenticity. And it's just been very pleasurable to have this conversation. I really, it just really has me lit up. And I want to share with our viewers who are live or watching this replay how they might get in touch with you, or the kinds of work that you're available for if people want to benefit from some of your healing and some of your services. I can attest for your ceremonial spaces, which are lovely, and dance classes, which are also lovely. But I'll let you speak about what it is that you're inviting to.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
So yes, I'm a life midwife. I'm a ceremonialist, and I facilitate sacred spaces for people to shift through whatever aspect of the arc of birth, life, death, rebirth, where they're needing support and facilitation for their own awakening, embodiment, empowerment. And so that looks like a lot of different things.
Mm-hmm.
And I weave in nature therapy. I weave in the embodiment through dance, breath work, and compassionate communication with self and others. And I like to co-create ceremony with people for whatever their needs, rites of passage might be. And so I have a website, goldendrake.org is where people can connect. And in San Diego, I offer a weekly dance experience, and it's at the Dance House on Tuesday nights at 6 p.m. And we have live badass women drummers. And it's an incredible opportunity for people to have an embodiment experience that's non-performative, in circle, in community. And so it feels really good.
Yeah, it does. It's a fun class, and it definitely opens me up a lot. I love just letting whatever emotions, energy move through. I just feel so expansive afterward, which is, you can't buy that feeling. You have to just do it. So you're really good at facilitating those feelings and those spaces. So I really hope that people will check you out.
Thank you, sister.
Yeah, thank you for being here. Now we rest, right? Now we retreat and rest. All right, thank you for joining us. Everyone who joined, you know where to find me. My website is here, Natasha Edwina, and goldendrake.org. And we will see you next week for another episode. Good night, everyone. Good night.